Welcome to ACM's Vault of Cult. My name's Andy. This is a movie podcast with a bit of a difference. I take a oldish film from the 80s or 90s usually that didn't do so well, but a film I love and several people, quite a few people probably love, but not a massive well-known hit, and show it to somebody who's not seen it, see what their thoughts are, whether they agree it should be classic or nostalgia's clouded things for me, and the other few people who like it. Basically, films I think should have been hits or at least become a cult hit, and hasn't. If you've been listening to the last few episodes, I have been mentioning that we're going to do a sort of comic book series or a few episodes of films based on comics that didn't do so well. Obviously now Marvel rule the world, so to speak, and DC films are doing well again as well. But I'm going to focus on some films that didn't do so well from the past. This one is actually a DC movie though, or based on a DC comic, Return of Swamp Thing. Talk about that very, very soon. But my guest on this episode is Antonia Howard, who you may know from the first series. Friend of mine for a very long time. We did do a radio show together for a while on ICR in Ipswich called Dirty Rock and Scoundrels. She's a big Swamp Thing fan, seen the first film, likes the comics, but this film has eluded her until now. It's one that, reading comics as a kid, it came out in 1989, so I imagine I was on video in this country in about 1990. I don't think it got a cinema release. I thought it was always straight to video, but reading some things it said it got a small release in this country, probably not from where I was from. But I remember seeing the adverts in comics, the poster with Swamp Thing holding the star Heather Locklear, and she's sort of doing a comedy scream in the poster. I think there's several different posters for it. I don't know which one I'm going to put up on this, but you'll see one of them as you listen to this podcast. And I rented it as a kid, really enjoyed it. I liked the humour of it. I'd seen the first one, I quite liked the first one, but it seemed something a little bit missing. I rewatched the first one recently and actually really enjoy it now. The second one though, I think it was the humour that helped. I really liked it. I remember renting it, as I say, as a kid, and going in a few weeks later and asking whether I could buy the rental from the shop, and they sort of bluntly told me no, which was the response you'd always get. But a year or so later, a couple of years later, it was sold to me as an ex-rental. I remember being very cocky, so I left the shop with the ex-rental with his massive case like they used to have, and I watched it to death. And it's been a long time since I watched it, between the times of video and DVD. Got a DVD release probably 10 years ago, and I bought it and gave it a watch. I don't know what happened to that DVD, so I recently rebought a few years ago, got a Blu-ray release, rebought that, which is what we watched it on to do this podcast. So yeah, let's have a listen to what myself and Antonia thought of the should-be classic Return of Swamp Thing.
Green guy is back.
They call me Swamp Thing.
You're a plant, aren't you?
He's come back to settle the score.
Find him and bring him in.
He's got a grudge, cause they turned him to sludge.
I believe this is yours.
What?
The Return of Swamp Thing. Starring Jourdan.
What did you do? Sell your soul to the devil?
Let's just say he has a lease with an option to buy.
Heather Locklear.
You needed my name named after most days.
Why can't men be more like plants? I mean, you can stroke a plant and it doesn't get the wrong idea.
And Swamp Thing.
But I can't give you the kind of love you want.
Why not?
I'm a plant.
That's okay. I'm a vegetarian.
Antonia, thanks for joining us. Or me, not us. How you been?
I'm good, thanks. Yeah, thanks for having me. It's nice to be on the podcast again after some time.
Yeah, you've not been on this series yet. We're in season 2.
Mm-hmm.
Last series you'd done Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2,
mm-hmm.
and there was another horror film, wasn't there? You've been on twice before. I can't remember the the other film.
Yeah.
Oh, it was Maniac Cop.
Was that technically a horror film?
It's sort of pushed
It was
as
more
one.
of a thriller.
Yeah, it's pushed as one, wasn't it?
The thrills were very few and far between, though, so it's difficult to kind of categorise.
Yeah, I think because Bruce Campbell was in it, everybody's like, it's a horror film. Let's sell it as that. And hopefully this one will fare a bit better with you. But well, that's just the sort of people who haven't listened to the other ones. What sort of films are you more into?
That's an excellent question, and one that I hate. Alongside, what sort of music do you like? Where the default answer is usually whatever's recommended to me on YouTube when I'm scrolling through it at 3 a.m. Films that I tend to like are usually either arty or cerebral films, or trashy films from the 90s.
Okay,
or a classic horror from probably what I would call the classic horror age, which is the 70s. Late 70s, early 80s.
Okay. So this could be close to the trashy 90s, I suppose, made in 1989.
Well, it kind of intersects with a few of my preferred genres, because it does have some sort of like horror elements and some comedy elements, which we'll probably touch on later.
Yeah. And you consider yourself a Swamp Thing fan?
I do.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm a woman of taste.
Yes. So more the comic book side, yeah?
More the comic book side, yeah, absolutely. I think I relate quite strongly to what Swamp Thing stands for, which the ecological themes, which I think could have been more fully explored in this film.
Yeah, there's not much at all. But we'll discuss that in a sec. I'll start by saying, have you seen the first movie?
Yes, I have.
And it's different tone to that. Were you a fan of the first movie?
I quite liked it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's I rewatched it last night, and I like it as a B movie, it's directed by Wes Craven, the original one that 40 years old this year. It came out in 1982. That's 7 years before this one. As a kid when I watched it, I also liked it, but nowhere near as much as this one. It's not as much fun, and basically the costumes and effects just aren't that good in the original one, which I think the film, watching it now, is helped by having a good director, because he works around that really well. But even if you look at the Swamp Thing costume in the original one to this, it's a lot better in this one. Yeah,
it's more obviously a rubber suit in the original film.
Yeah.
And with this one, I don't know that I'd agree that it's a better director. I think it's the pacing is a little off in places in this film, but I do think he does justice.
No, I meant they used a good director for the first one. Okay. He does a really good job with what he's got. I'd definitely say Wes Craven is a lot better and does this is played more for laughs, and it's a proper B movie director, whereas you've got a really good director in the first one who's not given much. So I think what he does with it, he does really well, and that's why it's considered by pretty much everybody as the better film.
The definitive.
Yeah. Whereas with this one, it's directed by a guy called Jim Wynorski, who's probably most well known for Chopping Mall, which was a horror film, B movie that came out a few years before this. Have you seen Chopping Mall?
I have not had the pleasure.
It's very 80s, set in a mall, and robots go mad, basically. A lot of fun. One of those surprise hits, really, more on video. And it's definitely become a cult classic, whereas this really hasn't. It has got a fan base, but mainly people discover this film, I think, through the comic books. And a few years ago there's a TV series, so people went back to it. So being a fan of Swamp Thing, is there any particular reason why you hadn't seen this before?
Again, excellent question. I possibly hadn't just got round to it.
Yeah.
I don't always think that this is controversial. I don't always think the comic books translate very well to the film format.
Yeah.
This, however, I would say it does. It's quite cartoony. It's quite sort of it's quite bold in its strokes. It's not subtle.
No.
So therefore, I think it does kind of translate quite well. There are a lot of kind of scene setups where actually you can imagine that being transposed sort of directly from a comic book illustration, which is quite effective.
Yeah. Should we touch on the plot?
Yeah.
That's something that isn't really discussed much when talking about this or the first movie, because the plot's quite, I'm not saying irrelevant, but
It's quite flimsy.
Yeah.
It's a flimsy plot.
It's Abigail, played by Heather Locklear, goes to basically track down the death of her, or find out what happened with the death of her mother, and comes across evil goings on. Well, it was her boss and boyfriend, was it?
It was her stepfather.
So her mum's boss and boyfriend, husband.
Yeah.
And I assume she worked for her. I think it's meant to be one of the characters from the first movie, but that's not really explained very well.
Mm-hmm.
And, well, the fact that you don't find out till 45 minutes through the fact that he isn't dead, because he dies at the end of the first movie, and then he's just there, and then it sort of backtracks. It's like they have to explain, and they don't even explain very well. It's just like, oh, well, we made him better from these evil people who found him. It's all a bit bizarre, isn't it?
Yeah, it's all a bit sketchy. His kind of his drives are quite sketchy, really. It's sort of implied that he's there to reverse the aging process. For some reason, he's doing this by creating mutants. One does wonder if it's better to just sort of buy a pot of moisturiser. So he's Dr. Arcane.
Yeah, played by Jourdan.
Played by Nigel Farage.
Very, very, yeah. Louis Jourdan, probably most well known for... he was a Bond villain in Octopussy, which... I don't remember him in that. All the Bond films sort of blur into one for me. But he's got that sort of feel. And he got the part in the first movie because Wes Craven saw him play Dracula in a TV thing. And you can see that he could be Dracula very, very well. He's got that about him.
Is it the kind of looseness, the kind of almost smug and kind of bored?
Yeah.
This narcissistic sort of remove from the rest of humanity, which I think works quite well for this role.
Yeah, he's kind of a mix between Dracula and Kenneth Williams in parts as well. So the basic plot, Heather Locklear rocks up. For some reason, he wants to use her DNA because he thinks that will help him with the age reversing.
The age reversing, which we found out about an hour in, that actually it's immortality that he's looking for, not just age reversing.
Yeah. Lots of goings on. And basically, Swamp Thing tries to save Heather Locklear's character. That's the gist, isn't it?
Pretty much the size of it, yeah.
Yeah. We will mention that they throw in, there's a subplot with two little kids who encounter Swamp Thing and just want to get a photo of him because they think they're going to get money. I found out that there was meant to be one scene with these little kids where Swamp Thing saves him, and then to add more comedy and to make it probably more kiddie friendly, they do more scenes with the kids chasing after Swamp Thing, which I find strange because they're basically attacked, so to speak, by this huge monstery. It's got a weird face.
Yeah, it's kind of Lovecraftian.
Yeah, it's quite scary. These kids would not be going after photos of these guys; they'd be traumatized. So that doesn't make any sense to me. But it's a comedy effect, and I think 1989, not too long after the Goonies, Monster Squad, that sort of thing, they want to throw that in, and I think it's one scene it would have really worked. But you mentioned during it kind of really slows down the pace of the film. And the kids aren't that funny, are they? No,
they aren't, and they do struggle from the 80s school of child actors where they're quite just sort of loud and overemphasising most of their words. So. Yeah. I mean, there's the odd laugh from them, but it's more miss than hit, isn't it? Yeah. Because you chuckled a couple of times at a few of the things. I can't think of what they said, but there was early on, there's a couple of lines. But it's mainly in... So. Yeah, it was when they were looking at the girly magazines. Yeah. And the younger of the two is pleased that one of the ladies in the magazine is a Scorpio, and he's an Aries, and he says, "Oh, brilliant! We'd get on really well." Yeah. Which I thought was quite sweet. Yeah. Yeah. So they're just kind of there, and I don't know. I mean, I watched this as a kid, and they're not characters I remember much about or remember even liking. And yeah, I think it's just thrown there for something else, almost to get it up to 90 minutes to have it that. I mean, it's a 12 certificate. It would have, I think when it came out, it was 12 certificate initially, then 15 on video. So because that was before you could have 12 on video. I definitely had an ex-rental copy of this that was 15. So it's one of those. It's that era, isn't it, where they'd make more adult films, but they were clearly aimed at kids, like the RoboCop sequels and things like that. And this is an era where you could buy action figures of Rambo
as mentioned in a previous podcast. So it's kind of it's a weird one, because what is its audience?
This is it. There are quite a lot of films of that era who are tonally it's very strange, because in common with a lot of sort of 12s and 15s, they're quite family friendly, or they're even aimed at children. But then you'll get jokes around sort of things like masturbation, or like, you know, you've got this leery kind of threat of sexual assault, which happens on more than one occasion in this film. Which you'd think would wash over children's heads, but perhaps it doesn't, you know. No,
it's very. I mean, I really picked up on it watching it just now. There's at least 2 scenes where Heather Locklear's character is under threat. One by a campfire with these 2, like, stereotypical, almost offensive hillbilly characters. Because it is offensive to people from there, isn't it? It's really, they're just looking for crimes to go out committing, these strong accents and just horrible. And she comes along, and they basically, if Swamp Thing doesn't appear, they would have sexually assaulted her. And then later on in the film, a prison guard does the same, or the head of the guards.
The chief henchman.
Yeah, we'll mention the henchman soon as well. Yeah, because that was something that's really strange about this film. And the second time, she kicks him in the privates and makes a vasectomy joke. And it's like, is that where the humour should be placed in this film? I mean, it's clearly meant to be a joke. It's meant to show that she's strong and can... But it's just a weird tone, isn't it? Yeah,
it's almost quite a victim-blaming implication. Like, if you couldn't fight somebody off, then that's kind of on you.
Yeah. And it's... Yeah, I don't know. It's kind of... You know, you've got to think this film is 33 years old, and things have changed. But there was a lot of that sort of humour in films, and I watched it as a kid, and it did go in my head. Watching it now, it really stands out, and also the fact you've got these kids in the film. So one minute you're watching The Goonies, and then the next minute you're watching, I don't know, a horror film or a B movie. So it does go from PG to 18, you know, from scene to scene. And some of the I really like the creature effects in this film, but they're not from a kids' film.
They're not from a kids' film, and some of them are almost, considering the effort that must have gone into, say, the cockroach man hybrid.
Yeah.
In one of the early scenes of the film, that must have gone to a lot of effort creating that.
Yeah.
And it's almost, I mean, it literally is kind of thrown away.
Yeah.
Because you see, it just exists to be destroyed in the same scene.
Yeah, and there's a few of the creatures you just see in the background a couple of times. So a lot of the budget would have gone on these creatures and the costumes that are barely used. I mean, it had a $4 million budget, which for the time isn't high at all. But a lot of it would have gone on the effects. There's not that many locations in it. There's a few exteriors, and then around this sort of, it's meant to be a mansion, but that's really it's not a very big building, is it?
No, it's rather a pokey mansion. That's more explained later in the film when it explodes.
Yeah. Some of that's a model, surely.
You would hope so.
You would, but it's a bit of the, you've seen an explosion in the front of the real exterior, and then there's a model. And I did want to quote "It's only a model" from Holy Grail when that bit happened. But all of it, I mean, I do think it looks bigger budget than it is. And when we've watched it on the Blu-ray where it's been cleaned up and stuff, which sometimes with these films doesn't help. It can bring out the fact that it's cheap, but I don't think it did in this. I think the fact that the main Swamp Thing costume looks great, and the few other monsters that are in it all do look really good, especially compared to the first one, which was only 7 years before. I think it stands up. If you watch it as a B movie, it stands up well, but it would probably be, you know, this is a while before the Marvel films, so it certainly looks better than, if you've seen, like, the same year, I think, or the year after, there was a Captain America come out where it looks like he's wearing pajamas. And the effects are terrible, and that probably had a bigger budget than this. Watching it, one thing what did come to mind with the sort of the attempted humour. Some of the humour does work. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it's not unfunny, but the tone of it really reminded me of the closest thing since really to the '60s Batman, because it's from a darker comic.
Yeah.
And then there's these one-liners, the thumbs up. and cheesiness.
Interestingly, early on in the film, you have this kind of Batman-esque sort of transitions
Yeah.
between scenes. They kind of forget about that as the film moves along.
Yeah, there's sort of one fairly near the end where it zooms into Heather Locklear's face.
Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely starts like that, and it starts. The intro has the comic book writing. There's a attempted sort of jokey intro scene where it's some guys who are like on a work.
Yeah, so you've got some masculine men,
Yeah.
and then they're bullying a neurodivergent man because he's having sensory issues from being in a swamp.
Yeah,
And then this rubber Lovecraftian being just kind of destroys them all.
Yeah, and then there's the losing of the glasses Velma scene.
Yeah.
Film for Scooby-Doo. The open scene it's a weird time because it's meant to be played for laughs, but they're under threat. So it's kind of what's going on, does the humour work? But it does I suppose it does set the tone for the whole film. But it goes on a bit too long. That's a scene that I hadn't watched this for probably at least 5 years, and I don't remember that scene. It's quite obviously forgettable, and we nearly didn't even mention it when talking about the film. Then it goes into pictures from the comics with CCR over the top, which big song, big band for a film like this. That must have been a lot of the budget must have gone on that as well. And I think it helps having the comic intro.
I thought it was a great intro.
Yeah,
Really enjoyed it.
and it does show as well that how well it looks like the comic, because the film does. It's only let down, I suppose, where there's a scene or a few scenes where Swamp Thing gets blown up. This is spoiler heavy, this podcast, by the way, and he sort of oozes into the mansion, which now would be done with CGI. It looks okay, but that's you can see it's a low budget film when this happens. And he comes out in the bath, and when he comes through the tap, it looks like someone's just putting bubble bath in, but through the tap. Do you see what I mean? But then I think it's done quite well because you sort of see his arms grow, and it looks rubbery, but it doesn't look that bad.
No, and he looks rubbery, so it makes sense.
Yeah. Performances. I've got to say that the first scene you see Heather Locklear in, I want to strangle her, she's really annoying to start with.
Yeah, it's quite an annoying, irritating thing. She's in a plant shop, and all of her plants, I mean, we assume it's a shop.
Yeah.
We assume she's trying to sell these plants, but it's made clear she's very emotionally attached to these plants. They have names.
One of which is Tommy, which is her then husband, Tommy Lee. Little reference. So she loves these plants, yet she's making money off selling them, and not, they will die, is what will happen. And then she just assume her employee that she's just buggering off now, so there's no organisation for what's happening with this shop. She just goes, and her employee doesn't even respond to her, does she?
No.
Which I think would probably be how I'd react to working for someone like that. But as the film goes on, I think she becomes more likeable. She's under threat, and there's 1 minute she's really scared, then she's having these one-liners, which is obviously of the time. You had that in sort of action films. I'm not sure it works too well, and I'm not sure she pulls it off too well.
No, she has the material that she's working with.
Yeah.
There's only so much she can really do. I would say she doesn't phone it in. She's trying to bring some energy to the role.
There's scenes of her with Sarah Douglas, isn't it? Who is probably, in my opinion, the best thing about this film. When they're sort of talking together, they argue, whatever. It is Heather Locklear from Dynasty and Melrose Place in them bits, and I think that's where she does well. She's from TV. I can't think of another, what do I say, proper non-TV movie what she's the star of. She's been in a few. I watched Firestarter not long ago. She's in a few scenes of that. So I think she does all right, but this is kind of a vehicle for her to get out of that. But then there's too many references. Like they reference T.J. Hooker in it as well. They reference Motley Crue as well as Tommy Lee. It's almost like, yep, we know who you are. We're not here for that. We're here for the film.
Yeah, and it's an interesting parallel that you draw, actually, because it is quite soap opera-esque in many respects, this film.
Yeah. It is, and I say she does fine. It's just that opening scene. She really annoys me, and that's she's like you say. She's doing what the script she's given, and I don't think the balance of laughs helps with you trying to like the character. That's kind of how I take it. But to be fair, it doesn't put me off the film. You know, there could be. I always think of, you know, because is she sort of damsel in distressy? Because 1 minute she is, and then she can stand up for herself. It's not. It's, you know, it's not 1950s swashbuckle. She's screaming, he saves her, is it? She can stand up for herself.
Yeah, to a point.
Yeah. And it's also not annoying Temple of Doom just screaming and I want to turn the sound down. So yeah, but she is really the lead of the film, because Swamp Thing, you don't actually see the actor who plays him.
You do
in the sex scene,
in the love scene.
That's different actor.
Oh.
Yeah,
you see an actor that plays him in the love scene. So there's a different actor. Why choose that actor?
They got, there's a story behind that. They got a model in, who he and apparently he was really arrogant and really disliked on set. Heather Locklear hated him, and the second they finished shooting, he got kicked off the set. And you know, I'm not one to say it, but he's not Fabio, is he?
He's hardly Fabio. No.
No.
No. See, this whole love scene, we're going to need to expand on that a little bit. So there is a scene with our two romantic protagonists where it's implied that they can only have physical intimacy by consuming a hallucinogenic bud from Swamp Thing's body. Yeah. And then suddenly he's a man in a dream. Yeah.
It's weird.
It's would you say it's tasteful?
Nope. But I don't like tasteful things. Yeah, it's just weird. He like snaps off a part of his body that is it his penis? No.
Well, it's kind of phallic.
Yeah, and then she eats a bit of it, and then the best thing is that after this sort of happens, you see a very love sceney, and then it goes off to the sky, doesn't it? And then it comes back, and they're just holding hands, and she's like, "Was that real? It's as real as you want it to be." What do you mean, Swamp Thing?
He means no.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, I assume she doesn't get pregnant from this. You know, it's really bizarre, and I don't really don't see the point of it. I really don't. But it's amusing, and we're talking about it, and yeah, it's just a bit. I like the whole. You know, she loves plants, so obviously, therefore, she can be attracted to him. That's why she's working in the plant shop, and that's...
Yeah, there's interesting kind of implications about sort of fluidity of female sexuality there.
Yeah, it's mad. Yeah. But we haven't mentioned who actually plays Swamp Thing. It's Dick Durock, who played him in the original one, and the TV series that came after this. Stuntman, who's been in about 70 films, but most well known for this. He's all right, isn't he? He does all right.
He's all right. For a stuntman, though, I would say that the action scenes are rather slow and carefully choreographed, particularly the fight scenes, which are they're obviously being very careful of each other, barely making contact, and everyone seems to be knocked out with one punch. But yeah, not stand up again for the rest of the film.
Yeah, the henchmen all get knocked out with one punch. I mean, I suppose you could argue he's Swamp Thing, so he's super strong. But come on, the fights with other monsters. They've all got these big rubbery suits on. They kind of get round it in one of the fight scenes because they're using weapons like sword fighting. That's the one I think's the most effective.
And that's the one outside Uncle's sheds, isn't it?
When the kids are watching.
The children are watching.
With one-liners like, things like, I hope they don't break my dad's car. Oh my God, it's broken. You know, it's mad. But the other fight scenes, and same in the first film, they remind me of the Godzilla fight scenes where it's just people who can barely move in suits knocking into each other. I don't suppose there's another way around this, you know, but it looks clumsy is the word.
It does look clumsy. It looks very ungainly. The scenes where Swamp Thing's fighting henchmen, and again he's kind of doing a lot of uppercuts, and it feels very Batman-esque, you know, as in the TV series. You want to almost see some pals and some blams popping up on the screen.
He does say at one point this is almost too easy when he's doing it. Tapping on the shoulder and punching in the face. I think it is because they're very limited to how they can do it, so they just go for it and do, let's just make this funny. Which I suppose, what else can you do? Should we talk about the henchman then? This is the...
Yeah, we can talk about the henchman. So, the head security guard, Mr. Gunn, which I think, along with Dr. Arcane, is a prime example of some nominative determinism there. Because what else are you going to do if you're called Mr. Gunn?
Exactly. You could direct Guardians of the Galaxy. Yeah, James Gunn. See, good. He's a character, isn't he?
Technically, yeah.
he's dumb. He's a dumb. Somehow he's head of security. There's a bit where he's doing a crossword. What's it? 5-letter word for? Is it for? Yeah. I can't think of
the security professional.
Yeah. So and then the female security guard said
said moron.
Moron. He's like, no, it doesn't fit. That joke's a lot better than we explained, or I explained it there.
What a good joke it was.
Yeah, but it establishes how thick he is. But he wouldn't have that job.
No, he's kind of the typical sort of 80s film dumb henchman. So he's chewing gum with his mouth open, he's standing in a certain way.
Hairy chest.
He does a lot of open mouth laughter. Hairy chested, which is exposed throughout the course of the film. He's not a sympathetic character.
No.
I think if you were to watch this film and relate to him, then you should probably have a conversation with somebody professional. Yeah,
and the female security who's always outsmarting him. I don't know if that character really works. It's nice that there's someone to put him down, but she's there for the male visuals, I think. There's a story about how she was supposed to have a nickname referring to her chest, and Louis Jourdan didn't want to do this. He's like, it's too sleazy for this film. And he really fell out with the director, who just said, well, you was in a film called Octopussy. And that apparently they didn't speak for long after that. But that's not in the film, so the actor won. And I don't think that would have...
What is her name in the film?
It's something... It's a longer...
Oh, it's poinsettia.
Yeah, so there was going to be
it's a plant name rather than a...
Yeah, so there was going to be about points. There was going to be a nickname. I can't think exactly what, but you can see where that could have gone.
He does call her Points at one point. And actually in the scene where they're comparing scars a la Jaws...
they do say it.
He says it once, yeah.
Okay, so I think that was supposed to be... the Louis Jourdan's character was supposed to say it a lot to her. And then he refused to. So, good on him. But then the director does have a good point. You were in a film called Octopussy. But maybe he was just a bit sick of that.
Yeah, maybe.
And Octopussy was a lot bigger film than this, so he's probably more likely to do as he's told. And the henchmen that you point out as well, that they're just running about.
Yeah, just running backwards and forwards. Probably to make it look like there are more of them.
Yeah, that's true. And what about the scene where the policeman shows up? And he's obviously looking for... Someone's gone missing, haven't they? So he goes to the mansion and he...
It refers to the men in the opening scene.
That's it, yeah.
Yeah. The work outing where they're for some reason wading through a swamp. So then they send a not particularly intelligent-seeming policeman to try to find them.
And he just goes along with everything Louis says, which it's quite funny because just how thick the policeman is. But I think that establishes the power this guy has around this community, because he's the one with the money. He's got this mansion, and they think it's fine that he's got people walking backwards and forwards with guns, protect them. Protect them from what? Crocodiles, Swamp Thing, and obviously I like this film, but it's quite easy to tear apart, isn't it?
Absolutely.
What's Swamp Thing do in his own time? Just wander about waiting for people to be, attacked.
I think he gardens because his own pad.
Yeah.
Is quite it's very naturalistic, obviously, because it is actually in the swamp, but it's decorated with nice flowers, and it seems if you had to live in a swamp, you'd probably live somewhere like that.
Yeah, he just sort of swamps about, swamping, doesn't he?
Yeah, just swamps around. I think what he does in it is he has random encounters.
Yeah.
That's how he spends his days.
Yeah, just
with
overseeing.
Encountering this Cthulhu-esque kind of trunk monster from time to time. Yeah. Who I think is another escapee from the lab.
Yeah, gotta be. It's just... I don't know what... this guy's there, and he... Straight away, they tell Abigail that they're working on something for the, to reverse the age process.
They're working for oil of Ulay.
Yeah. You would just say that straight away. The doctor character, with his constant inhaler, he's always using an inhaler, and I always think this is going to lead into some point or a big joke, but it's just so you know that when the monster appears at the end, who's wearing the same clothes as him, is him because he uses the inhaler. It's just we know it's him. What's the point? I don't get it.
Yeah, who else would it be?
Yeah, he's wearing his clothes. But that monster looks good. He's got that big old head and that. There's a bit where they're fighting and it looks well fake, isn't it?
Yeah, because the head is quite wobbly.
Yeah.
Almost comes off at one point.
Yeah, I like that bit. There's also a bit where you can see the director pushing a Jeep because I did read up on this that it wouldn't start and you can see him in the background pushing it.
Yeah, Mr. Gunn's triumphant kind of return.
Yeah. But that aside, like I did say earlier, I think the film does look good. It's got the soundtrack kind of work. It's every time you see Swamp Thing, there's like the da-dun music, which is very superhero-y.
Yeah, at some points it's quite comedic though, because he does turn up in some ridiculous situations, and you've got this fanfare behind it.
Yeah, but that's meant to be comedic, surely.
Oh yeah, it's not half bad,
Yeah, it's one of those films that it is likeable for all its faults. I mean, I always ask, what in it wouldn't you do now? And there's a few things we kind of touched on. There are bits that are a bit rapey. But a film I'm going to do later on in this sort of comic book part of the series is Supergirl, and there's definitely a bit in that where there's predators who will... There's a scene I remember quite well from that. I think it's Max Headroom's one of them, the guy who plays him. This is something that's up until maybe 10 years ago, you'd always get stuff like this in these sort of films. Mm-hmm. And maybe Me Too has come into this, and various things where people are aware that you've got stuff like this obviously happens, but don't put it in essentially a kids' film.
Well, it kind of normalises it, It kind of if you are a child watching this sort of film, it does normalise it. Or this is something that you will come across in your life. It's quite a normal thing, and you're just going to need to cope with it and battle your way through it, and that's fine, because then you can just progress to the next sort of section of your life and whatever. But it's it's not necessarily what someone should expect to happen in their life. Yeah,
and it's often, just laugh it off. It's fine. This is how men are.
Yeah.
And that's not... I mean, as you know, and as listeners may know from I always mention these films, I like the Police Academy films. But Mahoney's a sleaze. And you shouldn't get a character like that in a film nowadays unless he's meant to be the villain. The way he acts around people... Mm-hmm. You could even say it about Pete Venkman in Ghostbusters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was thinking Pete Venkman, yeah.
Yeah. And that, I think, you get away with that a bit, or the reason it got away with it at the time is Bill Murray's a very likeable guy. And because it's Bill Murray, you think, oh, he is only joking. But, imagine if Steve Buscemi played that role, or someone who's, or William Dafoe. If William Dafoe was acting like that, you know what I mean?
What are you implying about Willem Dafoe?
Well, he's got an evil face. That's what I'm implying. Probably a lovely man, but he's got an evil face. He freaks me out in Wild at Heart. He really does. You wouldn't do that. I don't think you'd get that part of that. You don't get that in the Marvel films, do you?
No, I wouldn't do that. And another thing I would leave out, which is, you might think is a small detail, but actually I think it speaks more towards the... You've lost a lot of the eco-warrior kind of messaging of Swamp Thing in this film. There's a scene where the child actors are eating some snacks.
Yeah, I was going to mention how you mentioned...
they're littering. They've got a pile of litter in front of them. They've eaten all the snacks that one of them has. and they've got some apples left over, and so they're sitting amongst this litter. They then are menaced by something that comes along, and then Swamp Thing comes along and saves them, but he doesn't mention the litter at all.
Yeah, they could have done that mentioned it in kind of a comedy. Captain Power,
Exactly.
Captain Planet. Yeah. And that's what this film needs. It needs that eco warrior. I mean, if you make a joke, you're laughing with it, not at it. You know, and I think that would really work. And I don't see why, they're missing a trick.
Yeah, I was expecting it, and it didn't come.
Yeah.
Just a quip.
Yeah, there's none of that in either of the films about and that it's very obvious in the comics where this, what that's.
Yeah.
It's a shame. Then if they made a film of this now, and they'd done the recent series, which I haven't seen, but if they'd done a light-hearted movie of this now, which could still happen, in a way that, say, Shazam is, there would be loads of jokes like that. And I think that would have helped the film. Made it more fun, more likeable, and it would help get a message across. There's no message in this film. There's no. There might be a message to buy cola products in one scene, which I did notice. I notice that all the time watching these films now. And another thing I don't think they'd do, while I think about it, is the bits with the adult magazines.
Well, that's it. We've got one scene there where one of the scientists is looking at an adult magazine, and he's muttering to himself, obviously for the viewer's benefit. Oh, she would look great with fins and maybe maybe flippers. And he obviously can't imagine a woman without looking at a magazine. But, probably that probably wouldn't be in it. Also, you could maybe touch on sort of genetic modification and GMO and eugenics and things like that, because obviously you've got that kind of thread which isn't really denounced in the film. There's no moral judgment around any of that stuff in the film. It's just, it's a very, very personal wrong. This man, this Dr. Arcane, he's as I've said, his soul is sold to the devil. It's very personal kind of wrong that he's doing, but it's not anything sort of global or beyond himself. He's causing this wrong, but it's not affecting others necessarily on a wider scale. And I want to also say that if he did sell his soul to the devil, he got a pretty rough deal, because he still has to put all the work in.
Yeah. He's dressed quite smartly though, isn't he?
He's a snappy dresser.
Yeah, he's
he gets changed in one scene to go out for a drive in the dark. He puts on a nice Panama hat.
Yeah. That's one thing this film has got going for it over the first one, is that they make the sense to set a lot of it at night. Rewatching the first one, most of it's set during the day, and I just feel that I don't want to see Swamp Thing walking about in the sunshine. It's weird. Some of the action's very A-teamy in this. I like that. And yeah, I mean, we've actually been talking 40 minutes. I thought this wouldn't take long, but it's a fun film. There's a lot to talk about. One of my notes is a sex scene. WTF? We've covered that. We've covered the plot. The fact that you've got to remember that it is trying to, it is this sort of film that, like the Batman series, gets criticised for being stupid and blah, blah. It's meant to be. It's meant to be a comedy as much as it is a comic book film, which really worked when you look at as I mentioned, the first one kind of got made off the back of Christopher Reeve's Superman, and I think the things that hold up most about those Superman films are the Clark Kent comedy bits, and with this, I think it's harder to do comedy the way they've done it. Like we said, they could have focused more on the environmental side, and he's a nice clean cut. They don't, but the way this film's made and on its budget, I'm so glad they did go the comedy route, because it would have just been. I love the B movie part of it, but it would have just been a bad horror film.
Yes, otherwise. It would have been a straight up not very good film. When it has these comedy sequences, this slapstick humour as well, and these jokes which are some more successful than others. It gives it that levity, and you're not supposed to necessarily take it all seriously. So where it's all a bit daft and schlocky looking, you can accept that as part of the package.
Exactly, yeah, and it's not full spoof mode,
no,
which I don't think would have worked either, because it's got the humour. It's kind of loyal to the source material in many ways, more than it isn't, if that makes sense. And I think this is after the sort of Alan Moore phase of Swamp Thing, where it picked up and got more mainstream. And that's probably one of the reasons it might have taken 7 years for a sequel, because the first film didn't do very well, even though it spawned this and a TV series. It was a flop, which in another respect is a good thing, because imagine if that had been a hit in 1982, then they went off and made more, and Wes Craven didn't make Nightmare on Elm Street. You know, I don't think I could live my life the same way without Dream Warriors. Classic. So, yeah, I think it works really well for what it is. It's got faults. Going into it with probably very little expectations. Mm-hmm. Did you come out of it thinking it was better than you thought it'd be?
Better's very subjective. I did have a good time watching it.
Yeah.
I'd say it was, on balance, probably worse in some respects than I was hoping, but better in others. As I say, I had a good time watching it, and if you're wanting something to watch that's not going to necessarily tax your brain too hard, you know, if you want something to just relax to, then I would recommend.
Yeah. It is one of those, early on, I mean, we sort of sat here, we didn't say much to each other during it, because obviously we want to do the talking after.
We're not friends anyway, so we don't really talk.
Who are you? You said right early on, this is aimed at stoners. Mm-hmm. And I can totally see that. For me, it's one of those beers Saturday night, even a throw on after you've been to the pub kind of movie. Mm. And it's popped up in the UK on the Horror Channel a few times in the afternoons. And I can imagine this being that sort of retired person flick it on. You know, Murder, She Wrote's finished. And they'd probably quite enjoy this.
Yeah.
And having Heather Locklear in it would help. They'd know her from... It was Dynasty she was in, wasn't it? Not Dallas. It was one of them.
Pretty sure it was Dynasty.
Dynasty. I know. I remember in Melrose Place, which was our era in the 90s. And it's kind of... You could put this on during the day and not have to edit too much. So there's no bad language in it.
No, you wouldn't need to skip any scenes, not really.
I suppose all the bad stuff's kind of implied. Mm-hmm. And it could also be a 2 a.m. B-movie, which, you know, so it's got that about it, I think. I mean, obviously the film bombed. It cost $4 million and it made 192,000. But I don't think it got a big... I thought it came straight to video in this country. I saw on an interview that it didn't. But I imagine it got like a couple of screenings possibly in London.
It's probably a good drive-through movie.
Yeah, it could have. Yeah, so that late night, you know, on a double bill or something.
Yeah.
But I think it was pretty much made for video, and then got a bit of a release because it's a character people know, and saying it, you know, it would have made its money back, you know, probably 10 times over with video sales and TV and stuff. And it's not that normally these kind of films, I always think they'd be a lot better on the big screen. I'm not sure this would make much difference.
No, I don't think it would be better on the big screen necessarily. There are some good explosions. You know, there are a lot of explosions, so I'll give them that.
Yeah. There's hand grenades.
So hand grenades, yeah.
Yeah. But action-wise, it's not like full-on action sequences. There's explosions, but it's not one of those films where there's the action set pieces. There's a little bits of it, and nowadays it would be a 2-hour film padded with action sequences, wouldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm kind of glad it isn't.
Likewise.
Yeah. I mentioned Sarah Douglas. That's a Superman connection as well, isn't it? Mentioned she was in Superman. She wasn't Superman 1, but mainly one of the villains of Superman 2. It's nice to see that DC crossover. I think she's really good in it. She doesn't really camp it up. She doesn't.
She has an element of class to the film, I would say.
Yeah, which is exactly the same. The last film I done was Solar Babies or Solar Warriors. She's in that as well and done exactly the same thing. And yeah, she's really good in it. Her earrings are great as well. I made notes on that. Massive.
Yeah, they're massive. There were a lot of earring changes, and they kind of indicated the motivations of her character, which do change throughout the film, and so do the earrings, depending on what's happening and what she's her sort of internal, external sort of machinations and plotting. I think, if you watch the earrings, then you can't go too far wrong. Yeah.
And she's only character who really develops through the film, really. And that's only because she is Snoopy and overhears basically, she overhears her boyfriend slagging her off, and then turns on him for good reason. He's an arsehole. That's my review of him. But actually, I think villain-wise for this kind of film, he's pretty good as well. He's got that. Yeah, I said that Dracula thing going on.
Yeah, sort of laconic thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's pure evil, and you need that in a comic book film. He's not quite Ming the Merciless evil. But. No,
he hasn't got the buying power of Ming the Merciless. Let's face it. He's got a muck mansion. It's not really. It's not what you'd really hope for. He talks about it being kind of finest antebellum architecture, but I'm not sure.
No, it looks like if people are listening from Ipswich,
it looks like a Bovis home.
It's at the top of Christchurch Park. The little building, not the big mansion.
Yeah.
Sorry if you're not from Ipswich. If you are from Ipswich, come and have a look at Christchurch Park. It's great. I could make a horror film here. Probably. I won't. Don't hold me on that. So would you recommend this to viewers in general?
In general? Depends what you want from a film, really. Yeah. But yeah, I think it's ideal Sunday afternoon viewing. If you're that way inclined, if you want to watch a relatively fun, relatively not exactly intellectual film, then yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Do you feel it's underrated? I haven't done the ratings,
well,
right?
I don't know how it's rated, so how can I know?
Here we go. Right, on IMDb, out of 10, 4.6, 44% on Rotten Tomatoes, and 2.6 out of 5 on Letterboxd.
Now, you see, I would say it's overrated. The way I tend to score things is a 5 is bang average. So if I see a film and I say it's 5 out of 10, that means it's an average film. People tend to think I'm being quite reserved with my grading. I don't. I think 5 is average, so 5 is a perfectly fine film. I would say this is below average. I would say it's more of a 3.5 out of 10.
Ooh, that's harsh.
It is not harsh. It's not harsh. It's slightly below average film.
Yeah, but for the sort of film it is and the time,
yeah, for the sort of film it is and the time, it's below average.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, this is where I'd give this a solid 4 out of 5 because it's got no
4 out of 5.
4 out of 5, yeah.
4 out of 5, not 4 out of 10.
Nope, 4 out of 5 because it's fun.
Please justify it.
Yeah, it's fun. How with the Swamp Thing franchise, what doesn't it do that you want?
Oh, I explained that.
I laugh a lot during this film, probably the bits I shouldn't. And it's got rubber suit people fighting. It's not. There's apart from the odd bit with the kids, it doesn't get boring. And you've got to agree. I love trashy movies, and this is one of them.
I do agree. You love trashy movies. I don't then necessarily think it follows that the movies are good.
I'd give Apocalypse Now 5 out of 5. Right.
Okay, so that is the perfect film.
Not the perfect.
What's 5 out of 5?
Well, it's a very good film. It's one of the best films because out of 100, I could give it a 93.
Okay.
Well, so but I can go back and watch this a lot more than I could that. I mean, Schindler's List 5 out of 5. I'll watch this more often than that. It's more fun in it.
More fun.
More fun. More daft. You can have a beer with it. You're not going to drink and have a beer. Well, you might do, but you'd end up crying during Schindler's List. You know what I mean?
You would. You should.
Yeah. So I sort of rate films if they do what they're supposed to do, and this is cheap and supposed to fill 90 minutes fun, then I think it does that.
It's fulfilled its objective.
Yeah.
I still don't think that necessarily means it's a good film or significantly above average.
See, this is why I'd give Tenet 1 out of 5 because it's boring and they spent lots of money on it. It makes me think. I don't like thinking, right? And it doesn't say that. I see Michael Caine and sort of action in the trailer. Michael Caine's barely in it. He's in it for a minute. Don't do that.
You feel it was missold?
Yeah. I mean, Jaws 4, right? Michael Caine on the poster. You know exactly what you're going to get. Jaws 4 is 10 times better than Tenet. There you go. I don't understand why you laugh. He doesn't say you're only supposed to blow the bloody jaws off. It would be 5 out of 5 if he said that.
Agreed.
There we go. So out of 5, you'd give this a 3. So out of 5, 1.75.
Mhm. Yep.
You're going to round it up to a 2 or down to a 1?
No.
No, okay, neither. Okay. You've given this lower, I think, than you gave Maniac Cop. I'm a bit...
I have.
Whoa.
No, I'll round it up to a 2 then. Yeah, on a scale, if it includes Maniac Cop on the scale, I'm going to need to give this a 2.
Okay.
Alright.
Yeah, that's not bad. That's not bad.
It's not bad, it's below average, but I think that's fair.
Yeah. But
doesn't mean I didn't like it.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't think you expected this film to be above average. Surely.
I didn't. No. My rating doesn't necessarily reflect how much I enjoyed it.
That's where we rate different.
Yeah,
see.
I know.
Yeah.
I know, it's how good of a film, objectively, I thought it was.
There's different types of enjoyment, because if I've just said that, and then I've said I'll give Schindler's List 5. It's not because I thought it was a roller coaster fun, you know. I wasn't like, I always think of things like this. You know that scene in Naked Gun where they walk out the cinema laughing like a lot, and they're watching Platoon.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's not. Yeah. So, thank you very much for joining us. We've got to nearly an hour. That's enough, isn't it?
Well done.
Yeah. Just very quickly to put you on the spot. Any films you've watched recently you'd recommend? Ooh.
Well, I watched Jurassic Park Dominion at the cinema, and I think it was worth watching for just to kind of round off the latest kind of trilogy.
Okay.
So if you've seen the other two, you probably should watch that one.
Yeah. Okay. That's. Right. You saw the Black Phone as well, didn't you?
I did see the Black Phone. Yeah. That was. I quite liked that, probably because I grew up watching kind of Stephen King adaptations, and it sort of tonally very much reminded me of those in places, especially the opening and ending kind of sequences. Yeah, do watch that if you get the opportunity.
Yeah, I enjoyed that. Do you think, and this is the hardest question you'd possibly be asked, the kids in Black Phone, was their acting better than the kids in this?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, yeah, that's the world of difference, isn't it?
It was, yeah.
Thank you very much for spending your time watching this great movie and then chatting about it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you. Massive thanks to Antonia for that. Good to see that our rating systems are kind of different, but we enjoyed it. And it's nice to have the contrast. I mean, a lot of people rate films in different ways, and it's kind of interesting. If you look at the scores I give films, I'm often criticised for being too generous, I suppose, and I know Antonia's been criticised for being too harsh. So maybe if you want to know how good a film is, take our two scores together and divide it by 2, and you might get what it should be. Who knows? But hell of a lot of fun. Hopefully we'll get back on another one fairly soon. I plan to anyway, and pretty sure she'd be up for it. Seem to enjoy that. Just before we end, I'm going to once again talk about a recommendation of an asylum film. You know, the Mockbuster film company, renowned for making so-called rip-off movies. The last few episodes I've recommended, I haven't been watching as many of them, but I've got a good one this time. It's called Android Cop. You can probably guess what it's kind of borrowed from. Of course, RoboCop. Now, this movie was made in 2014, so really it came out around the same time as the reboot of RoboCop. I mean, I just said about how generous I am with my rating systems and stuff. Should probably rewatch the reboot of RoboCop, because I remember really, really disliking it. And that's not me, is it? Especially for a film like that. But I didn't like it, and I'd have probably given that a 1 or a half out of 5. So I'll have to say I did enjoy this more than the reboot. Obviously, the original RoboCop I love. It's one of my favourite films. It's fantastic. But anyway, Android Cop got 3.2 out of 10 on IMDb and 2.1 out of 5 on Letterboxd. Directed by a guy called Mark Atkins, who's done such classics as Planet of the Sharks, Sand Sharks, and Jurassic School, which is awesome. Google that and look at the cover. Looks fantastic. He wrote and directed this. Basically, it is kind of a RoboCop rip-off with the Android Cop. But the difference in this is, there's not much of a plot, to be honest, but the difference in this is he's buddied up with a regular cop, so it becomes a buddy cop movie. And the regular cop is played by his name escapes me. Here we go. Michael J. White, who was in Spawn, played Spawn in another film I should rewatch because I couldn't stand it when it came out. I love the comics of Spawn, and if I had have liked it, that movie would have been one we'd have done in this sort of mini series of it. But can't really. It doesn't fit with the film. I might rewatch it and then I can have a little chat about it afterwards. After 25 years or whatever, it might be. I might like it a bit more, but probably not. But he's great in this. He plays the cop who doesn't really want to be working with an android cop. The android cop is played by a guy called Randy Wayne, who I hadn't heard of, but he was in a TV sort of follow-up to the Dukes of Hazzard. Called The Dukes of Hazzard: The Beginning in 2003, and he was in Hellraiser Judgment in 2018. One of the few Hellraiser films I haven't seen. But yeah, he's fine. He does the robot acting quite well. It's lots of CGI, terrible special effects, but I kind of liked it. I liked the buddy copness of them not getting on, and guess what they do at the end? Kind of sort of carries it, and for this sort of film, very enjoyable, really. I mean, when you watch one of these, you don't expect much, and usually, to be honest, you don't get much. But this is a solid 3 out of 5 by my standards. So imagine Antonia was to give it 1, so it's just 2.5 out of 5, which is fine. So if you want to watch a bad movie to fill some time, Android Cop, I recommend it. I don't know if it's available anywhere to stream, but I bought the DVD really, really cheaply, and it wasn't even second hand. So if you want to watch it, you'll be able to pick it up for a couple of quid. So yeah, thanks a lot for listening. They'll be back for another episode, comic book themed, very soon. What we've got lined up, I've got someone who's going to chat with me about the movie Dick Tracy from 1990, Supergirl 1984. We'll definitely be doing that. That's one we've talked about for doing for a long time. Tank Girl from 1994 we're going to do, definitely. And Buck Rogers in the 25th Century. You might think, that wasn't a movie. The pilot episode was released in cinemas in the UK, so I'm counting it. I'm going to have a chat about that. But we are also going to, in some of these episodes, chat about some TV series based on comic books that you might not remember or didn't do so well. I'm hoping to sort of show an episode of each of these series to a different person, and we can chat about it, as well as chatting about the films. I'm going to talk about the series of Superboy from, I think it was the late 80s, early 90s, and a lot of people remember. The original 1990s series of The Flash is another one. I'm going to do a bit of research, see what else I can find, because there was quite a few TV series that sort of came after, say, The Incredible Hulk, which was hitting the Wonder Woman in the 70s, 80s. It was a bigger thing on TV than it was in the cinema, so there was probably more shows. Also, I'm not going to do a full review, but I'll get someone to talk with me a little bit about the Nick Fury David Hasselhoff movie, which I think we do have to talk about. David Hasselhoff did play Nick Fury. That happened. I have the DVD. I don't remember much about it, apart from it was obviously really cool because David Hasselhoff was in it. Right, thanks everybody very much for listening. Please give us a rating on Spotify. If you click 5, that will help. Would really appreciate it. I hate to beg, but I will. Please share, comment everywhere possible. Facebook, Instagram, find us on that. Thank you very much. Any films you recommend, you reckon that I might not have seen, you reckon I'll like, I'll give it a go. I'll watch films. I've got a full-time job, but I don't sleep, so I can do it. Thank you very much. I've been Andy. This has been ACM's Vault of Cult.